So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. simultv.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she'd come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me. simultv.com, sonny boy.
simultv.com.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
simultv.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. simultv.com.
Welcome to another edition of Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is the one and only Rob McConnell. Folks, for those who are just joining this show or me for the first time on this network, as well as for people who tune in regularly, and I'm honored to say we have literally a global, worldwide audience. I was surprised to see that we seemingly have a large following in Japan. I've never been to Japan, so I'm a bit surprised, but I'll take the fans anywhere I can get them, as long as they tune in and hopefully enjoy what they're hearing and get people to engage each other and talk about important issues. At least I hope they do. Anyway, we cover everything from politics to the paranormal on this show, and that's a wide variety of subjects. So let's get caught up real quickly on some news updates, and then we'll talk about politics. All right, to update some international news stories, the Saudis are saying now that the Saudi prosecutor has recommended the death penalty for at least 5 of the 11 accused killers or suspects in the murder of journalist Khashoggi, who was writing for the Washington Post. He was also writing for other publications. Now, you have to appreciate the cynicism in this decision, because this hit squad that was sent to kill him, murder him, it was a murder, let's be blunt. They didn't act on their own. Doesn't work that way in Saudi Wahhabia. Instead, they were acting on the orders of somebody very high up in the government, most likely the Crown Prince himself, since he spoke to Khashoggi on the phone just before they suffocated him with the plastic bag over his head. Duh. And what happened is according to what the Turkish government has released, and they've included audio of some of this, his last words, basically the command was given to bring me the head of the dog, quote unquote, and then, of course, they cut his head off and used acid to dissolve the body, because the Saudis are nice guys. So apparently that's what happened. Now these guys who are following orders, at least 5 of them, will probably be executed. Can you imagine getting an order from the leader of Saudi Wahhabia, the Crown Prince, MBS, and he says, go kill this guy if he doesn't agree to kiss my you-know-what, and then you follow your orders, and then you're fired, and then you're prosecuted, you're in prison, God knows what they're doing to you there, and now they're recommending that they're going to kill you just because you followed orders. And, of course, you won't be allowed to present your own testimony. That's not going to happen. And if you do present your own testimony, you're not going to dare indict the Crown Prince, of course, because that wouldn't be good for the rest of your surviving family. So that is the form of so-called justice in Saudi Wahhabia. That's what's being done there. And I just thought I'd update you on that, because as long as the world community allows Saudi Arabia to get away with this kind of behavior, then whatever nations profess to be upholders of rule of law and human rights, they're just hypocrites if they don't hold the Saudis accountable. There's a lot of oil out there. You don't have to sell your morality for the black stuff that comes out of the ground. Get a clue. All right, another interesting story, very different subject, because again, we cover everything from politics to the paranormal. There's been an amazing discovery that has been found in Greenland. Now, global warming fanatics, they obsess over Greenland and the North Pole because they like to point out how all the ice is melting out there. Remember, Al Gore predicted, 4 years ago, that the North Pole would be completely melted by now, based on the science is certain, remember? Well, last I checked, the North Pole still has plenty of snow. In fact, I remember doing a story for Daily World newspaper in India years ago when they actually were able to measure by satellite that large parts of Greenland was actually melting, and the media freaked out. But then I researched the Indian satellite data because I was in India, of course. That's what a journalist does when you're in the neighborhood and you live there. And I found out that it turns out that the melting that they were talking about actually was normal, and that there are a couple of days during the year in the summer where the sun is at the right angle and it's emitting enough heat, and it does cause these puddles of water to form. The ice starts to melt, and then it refreezes, and Greenland is still there. And that's the part of the story that the lamestream media didn't publish. I published it. It was even picked up in the Punjabi edition in Punjabi, and it solved that myth. It exposed it as a alarmist fraud. So now what scientists have discovered is something that's very interesting. They have actually found the forensic mark in the ground, the pockmark, if you will, the crater left by a meteor that slammed into Greenland about 12,000 years ago, according to them. And it devastated that area with the force equivalent to 56 million Hiroshima nuclear bombs. So you take the nuclear bomb that we dropped on the Japanese in World War II in Hiroshima, and multiply that by 56 million times, basically I think it was 1 megaton bomb. No, I don't think it was a megaton, but anyway, whatever the numbers were, multiply it by 56 million times, and that's the devastating force that this mile-wide solid piece of iron caused when it slammed into Greenland. Now, I don't care what your view is on climate change, whether you believe it or not, or what used to be called global warming, but you have to admit that when a meteor does that, it's going to affect the climate. And of course, there are ancient accounts of a massive flood, both in the religions of Judaism and Christianity, of course, and in the old Sumerian, Babylonian texts. There's this talk about a flood that had happened and that a large ship was built to try to save lives and animals and so on. The most popular version or incarnation of that story is Noah's Ark, as it's popularly known in the Old Testament or the Pentateuch in Judaism of the Bible. Did it really happen? We know there was a flood. There's been several of them over documented history. How accurate is the account of the Bible? We can't prove it one way or another definitively, but the fact that this has now been found, the crater is there, the samples have been taken from the impact point. We know exactly this is beyond dispute. This totally destroys all past climate models that the global warming advocates have been pushing because they didn't know about this event. And what's interesting is when ice core samples from other places around the world, like far opposite in Antarctica, are studied, there's no evidence of this. It's not there. Or if it is there, they've missed it. Either way, it is a humble reminder from Mother Nature, for lack of a better term, God if you're religious, I guess, that just when we think we know everything, we really don't know anything, or we know very little. Our egos get in the way of our understanding. For us to assume that things were always the same way in the past just because we observe the way they are now, that's a theory called uniformitarianism. You can't prove it often, and it's often wrong because things do change. And what would happen today if a large asteroid smashed into the Earth? Could we even stop it or alter its course? Would we have to fire thousands or hundreds of nuclear missiles to do that? We don't know because we haven't had that challenge yet. There is a international treaty among nations, Russia, China, us, essentially the nuclear powers or countries that can get into space, including Japan, that if an asteroid does come to Earth and it's going to smash into us, apparently there's an arrangement to fire missiles to try to destroy or alter its path by the different nations. They cooperate so that they make sure they're not trying to fool each other and trying to nuke each other, or some country mistakes a launch by us as a nuclear attack. So I'm glad that those treaties are there. But in modern times, or at least since the history of the human race that we know of, we've never had that danger or problem. Probably one of the closest encounters of a potentially devastating asteroid occurred in Siberia in the early 1900s when a carbonaceous chondrite meteorite exploded about 10 kilometers above the Earth and was as powerful as several hydrogen bombs. It leveled forests for hundreds of square kilometers around. It caused such a huge illumination at night that there are actual newspaper accounts from the European press, especially in France, where people reported that they could read the newspaper at night without a street light because the light from the impact of this explosion over Siberia was so enormous that it was light for a couple of nights during that impact. And this is actually reported in the newspapers at the time, so we know it did happen. Now, thank God it didn't land in a populated area. If it had landed in Paris, it would have wiped out most or much of France. Luckily, that hasn't happened, but there's no guarantee that it won't happen in the future. We don't control that. There's a lot of stuff floating around up there, and of course, it gets attracted by gravity and everything else going on. And one day, something like that is going to happen. It's inevitable. It's only a question of, are you going to be alive during that time? It's kind of like California. If you live in California long enough, you're going to experience an earthquake. That's just the way the geology is there. All right, so that's an update on a couple of the top news stories. What we're going to do as we get into the rest of the show now is we're going to talk about the election and what's been going on there. And what I'm going to do going forward is, and I don't know how many shows we're going to do like this, but I have said for a long time now, because it's true, that because I talk to a lot of people around the world, just like a lot of you do who are listening to this, we talk about politics, we talk about whatever. I am sick and tired of hearing the left and the Democrats and people who hate Trump dismissing people who support Trump as being Nazis or racists or people who just don't get it or whatever. They're missing the point. The point being that if the Democrats had run a better candidate than Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump may not be president today. But what did the Democrats do? They rigged their own primaries against Bernie Sanders. They because Hillary spent hundreds of millions of dollars essentially bribing people to get her support. The superdelegates they gave her before the first primary even was held was such a formidable lead that nobody could overcome it. It was essentially a rigged election on the part of the Democrats. So Queen Hillary lost. I'm glad she lost. While I don't support Trump, as far as I'm concerned, like most Americans, the election was between two lousy choices. And because I refuse to choose between two lousy choices, I have higher standards than that. I decided to vote for neither. So that's what I did. And I don't support the Democrats. I don't support the Republicans. Instead, I care about individual issues. And we'll come back to that issue after this commercial break.
It's hard to listen to the news without realizing we're living in volatile, unprecedented times. Yet never has there been such an opportunity to transform the human condition. As old structures fail, where can we find the guidance to co-create a better way? Find Your Path Home is an ever-evolving, leading-edge information, education, and healing resource center designed to support and guide you on your path to unity and enlightenment. Based on sound principles employed by shamans worldwide, we provide techniques that can support you through the current transitions, offering online shamanic classes, international long-distance shamanic healing sessions, complimentary Mission Evolution radio episodes and Stairway to Heaven TV vignettes, seminars, retreats, and much more. All of this can be found on findyourpathhome.com.
Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X-Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X-Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X-Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomenon, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
Welcome back to the second segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. As we were talking about before the commercial break, the election, as an American who's lived outside the country for 18 years, covering the American scene as a bureau chief and a reporter going back many years overseas. Of course, I covered the 2016 election, every single milestone of it. For what it's worth, I predicted Trump would win, not because I supported him. I got accused of that immediately, which is ridiculous. I've never voted Republican. I don't identify with Republican ideology. I don't identify with the Democrats anymore. From my point of view, for right or wrong, it's my opinion. I'm entitled to it, and I think I can defend it with logic and valid arguments. I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me, and that's very different. I quit supporting Democrats during the waning last year and a half, maybe two, of Bill Clinton's administration because I have higher standards. I can't back someone as unethical as Bill Clinton. And I had the honor of working with a friend at Boeing at the time who worked for the Clintons for many years, knew all the people. He's from Little Rock. And he told me all kinds of stuff, and we're still good friends today. And maybe I'll have him on the show a little bit later at some future date. But speaking of that, I am going to make a point to do something over the course of several different shows over time. Won't be done overnight, can't be done overnight. I'm going to put average Americans and people from around the world on the show, and I want to talk about politics, why suddenly they care about this, why suddenly they care about that. And the first guest I'm going to have in the next show will be Roy Neal, who is the president and owner of Neal Research Labs. Roy is a longtime colleague of mine. I met him first at Apple Claris when we used to work there in the early 90s. And I was at Apple a couple of times, of course. I was also there in the 80s, of course, for the original Macintosh launch. So I met Steve Jobs. He changed my life. I still miss him to this day. And I didn't like writing his obituary and some of the other stuff because he was a big influence on me, still is today. And you can thank Steve Jobs and Apple for a lot of stuff we take for granted today, everything from the mouse to pull-down menus to your beloved smartphone. So what I want to do is put average people on, and I want to hit them with some of the nonsense, the charges, the BS that the left and the mainstream media accuses these people of. And it's not fair. Shame on the media for doing this. And I can say this as a fellow journalist, because I'll tell you what bothered me was my fellow journalists. I know a lot of people around the world who work for major media. I've been on a lot of the major networks myself. And I will tell you that there was absolutely a clear bias against Donald Trump and any Republican. And it was all unanimously in favor of Hillary Clinton. But then there were some liberal types in the media that saw something happening within the Democratic ranks, and that was the rise of Bernie Sanders. What distinguished his campaign from Hillary Clinton's is that it shunned big money. All of his donations came from essentially individuals. He didn't take big money from big money. He's not Hillary Clinton. He didn't sell out. And while the Democrats like to say they're against big money in politics, that's just bull BS. It's never – the Democrats sold out when Clinton essentially signed the executive order. This is a historical fact. We've talked about this before. We must remember that Clinton decided to sign an executive order and essentially gave his blessing to allow communist China to join the World Trade Organization, and human rights didn't matter anymore. China had no incentive to reform itself for the better. So, of course, it hasn't. It's become more oppressionistic, if that's a term. It's become more repressive. It's become more of a totalitarian society, to the point today where China has a social credit system running the country. If you don't spend a certain amount of time devouring the Communist Party literature, if you dare to have a cross in your house or fly a flag other than the communist flag, if you don't have a portrait of the great leader in your house with effusive praise, if you spend too much time playing Xbox games, literally, you get demerits. And if you do the pro-communist stuff, you get credits. They are actually controlling their society by this way. And they have it tied to facial recognition systems. They even have algorithms that identify people based on the way they walk. Unique characteristics that can be programmed into a computer. And Google has helped them do this. And that's rather interesting and hypocritical of Google, because remember, one of Google's key foundational principles was don't do evil. Don't be evil, remember? Well, isn't supporting a communist totalitarian dictatorship who has concentration, labor, and re-education camps, who has the death penalty for many crimes, including corruption, isn't that supporting evil when you support a regime that doesn't respect or support human rights? Well, that's my definition of evil, but apparently it's not Google's. Google wants a piece of that Chinese money. So they have helped in secret develop a draconian search engine for the communist Chinese government. They've been paid handsomely for it, of course, and it has caused a scandal within Google. People have resigned over it because they object to this principle of violating, don't be evil or don't do evil, but Google doesn't seem to care. And speaking of a very similar thing, while it's on my mind, let's talk about Facebook real quickly. Let's call it Google's cousin, Facebook, because between Google and Facebook, let's be honest, that's most of the online media. Facebook owns WhatsApp. That was an application that was invented in India, became very popular because of its large population there. And so Indians were going on that instead of Facebook. When Facebook bought them, Facebook got the best of both worlds. So between Facebook and Google, that is most of the internet. It's hard to be successful on the internet if you don't play in the Facebook pond and the Google pond. That includes YouTube and a bunch of other stuff, Google Maps, etc. So what did Facebook do? Well, Facebook is famous, I argue infamous, for obsessing over what is called fake news. They seem upset that their social media empire was used during the 2016 election by the Russians and Chinese, let's be honest. They're the ones that hacked Hillary's server, by the way, but you won't see the Democrats mention that. They just obsess over Putin. Russia didn't do it. The Chinese did, and we now know that because it's been declassified. So the idea that Hillary's server was never hacked, the claim that it was never hacked has always been a lie. It was hacked by China. They were reading everything. Thank you, Hillary. So what did Facebook do? Well, of course, they're fighting fake news. And according to Facebook, they've deleted around 1.5 billion accounts. Now, that's a rather interesting number because according to Facebook, they have a little over 2 billion users online. Are you telling me that 75% of them are phony and you've deleted them because they're too far right for Facebook or it's a phony person? Wow. If 75% of all the Facebook people you're interacting with out there don't really exist or the fake accounts, what does that say about Facebook? If I were an advertiser who bought into their rates and schemes, I got 2 billion users, and all of a sudden I find out that 1.5 billion of them are fake or have been, closed down, I'd want my money back. But that's for other companies to argue over. But let me tell you what Facebook has done. They're denying it, but the evidence seems to indicate that they're not telling the truth here. It seems that Facebook hired a company, a PR company, this has been exposed in the news as of last night, to attack Jewish billionaire George Soros. Now, why would they attack Soros, since Soros is against Trump, right? He's a left-wing, bleeding liberal. He believes in open borders. He believes in no borders. He believes that migration, immigration, whatever is okay. And he has this Greater Society initiative, his version of it, right? He's tied in with the Obamas a lot, and a lot of Democrats, of course, they love him. See, the Democrats love George Soros's big money, but they don't like the Koch brothers' big money because the Koch brothers don't give it to them. That's why they don't like it. But Soros gives them plenty of money. In fact, he's announced that he's spending $500 million more to go ahead and punish the U.S. and other countries to encourage massive waves of migration. And he's admitted he's going to, fund this as part of his open society nonsense. So what did Facebook do to George Soros? And George Soros has a lot of money. He's not a guy you trifle with. Well, what they did is they hired a PR firm, according to the media, who blew this open last night. And the PR firm was hired to attack and discredit George Soros and blame him for all of the bogus attacks on Facebook. Now, talk about a scapegoat. If you look at the Old Testament, somebody would sin and they go grab an animal and apologize to God and sacrifice it, and all their sins were forgiven, right? God helped the poor animal who died for something he didn't do. Well, that's basically what Facebook has done with George Soros. They took George Soros, who had nothing to do with the issue. They might as well pick Bozo the Clown, just as relevant. And they say, oh, he's responsible for spreading these attacks against Facebook because all the attacks are invalid. Facebook does nothing wrong. So Zuckerberg seems to have himself surrounded by a bunch of, brown-nosed lackeys who are yes men. And they're essentially, surrounding the wagons here around him, protecting him. And what they've done, although they deny it, they're just now being hit with this charge by the media who have investigated this. They said, no, we didn't do any such thing, but they're providing no evidence to disprove the allegations. So imagine Facebook, who's concerned about fake news, goes ahead and hires a PR firm to frame a guy who had nothing to do with the criticisms of Facebook, and they're generating by that very dynamic fake news. If that isn't the definition of hypocrisy, nothing is. So that's what you have going on with Google and Facebook. I hope you guys love what they're doing morally and ethically, politically, whatever you want to call it. No wonder people are starting to drop these services, or there are calls to break them up because they've become too powerful, especially when they can make or break governments. We'll be back after this commercial break.
They are here, and they've been here for thousands of years, making their presence known in the shadows. They might be seen by a lonely motorist on a deserted road late at night, or by a frightened and confused husband in the bedroom he is sharing with his wife. But who are they? What do they want? Why are they here? Perhaps most concerning, has the government been aware of their presence all along? The new book by Eli Marzulli, UFO Disclosure, the 70-year cover-up exposed, delves into the world of UFOs. Can full disclosure be soon? Order now and receive a free hour and 37-minute DVD on the UFO phenomenon. UFOs are real. Get both the book and the DVD, a $40 value, for only $19.99. To order your book and DVD today, go to lamarzulli.net. That's LAMARZULLI.net.
Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back to the third and segment here on Cal's Corner radio show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff. I am your host once again, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. So enough about Google and Facebook. I just want to end the comments about saying we all know that they have an enormous influence in facilitating at least people communicating or arguing with each other on Facebook, at least, debating the issues and so on. It was very clear that going back many years now, you may remember that both Google and Facebook voluntarily, quote unquote, helped the Barack Obama campaign. Now, that technically violates campaign finance laws, but of course, Democrats won't go there. And now, of course, they've been busted doing these things. And this can't continue. It's a recipe for disaster. And if you look at what's going on, Facebook is losing users. Some people have taken the view that it's a necessary evil now. Kind of like today, if you want to be, taken seriously in the job market, you have to have, of course, a resume or CV. You have to have maybe a web page, an email address. Otherwise, companies won't even talk to you. You have to do stuff online. Maybe you have a Twitter account. Maybe you have a Facebook page. Maybe you're an old school guy who even used MySpace. I don't know. A lot of these things people feel they have to have in order to be part of society today. And that's both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing when technologies come out where they can empower people to do great things. It's a curse when technologies come out that empower people to do bad things. And what everyone, I think, would agree on, regardless of where you stand politically, is that the world is increasingly becoming much more polarized. And ironically, this polarization seems to be occurring in the so-called leading light nations. These are nations that are supposed to be role models for other underdeveloped countries or backwards countries to emulate. Europe, the European Union, that's a utopian idea, right? All the countries and all these cultures get along together. These 28, 29 entities in this area, that's roughly the size of Canada. The size of India. India is the size of the EU. That's to give you a scale, a size and scale. That's a utopian idea because, at least through history, all these countries hated each other and they created devastating wars. The most devastating war in history, as I recall, is the 30 Years' War, which occurred in Europe. That was the war between the Catholics and the Protestants and the Hussites, all in the name of God, of course, where 1/3 of Europe was wiped out in the name of God. The Catholics won the war, and one can argue that ever since that time, Christianity has been rather curious, Anyway, so that has happened, and then, of course, you have these attempts in the U.S. to impose or force or create a groundswell movement for what the youth, millennials, are calling socialism. And it's very clear that the youth doesn't really understand what socialism is. Otherwise, it wouldn't be advocating it. And that's proof they either don't know what they're talking about or, in my opinion, they're just wrong. They're not very intelligent on that issue. So that's what's going on. And, of course, social media plays a huge part in that role. But it can also be used to, abuse people. Look at what has happened with Fox journalist and TV personality, newscaster, Tucker Carlson. Do you think it's right for people to go to his home? These are lefties that, cracked his door, tried to get in his house where his wife is at home by herself. And they're chanting out there and shouting, "We know where you live. We know where you sleep at night." And basically, they're trying to intimidate him to get him to shut up. Now, is that the proper way to behave? No, it's not. And this is why I can't stand the left-wing liberal media, because they are hypocrites. It's easily proven. Look at the group Antifa. Now, I understand that there's all kinds of chapters of this group and that people can start their own Antifa chapters, and the headquarters of Antifa is so together they can't do anything to rein these bozos in, these extremists. So anybody can call themselves Antifa, and they do. Then they hit somebody upside the head with a padlock and a bike chain, break their skull open. Then they get only probation and a warning. That's not justice. That's a criminal assault, and the person should have the book thrown at them as a lesson, if nothing else, to society to say, hey, we cannot accept this kind of behavior. It doesn't matter whether you're a liberal or a conservative. So let me break it down for you how I see things, at least, and I think I can defend this stuff with facts and logic. I certainly talk about this a lot over the years with people. On the left, or let's call it the blue party, you got the Democrats. I often call them Dumbocrats. And I was accused yesterday by somebody on Facebook who says, I hate the Democrats. I don't hate them. I know what it's like to feel hatred, okay? I don't hate the Democrats. I just don't support them because I have higher standards. It's that simple. If you want to call that hate, that's your problem. So I reminded this lady who accused me of this on Facebook that, I don't support the Republicans either. I often call them re-thuglicans when they do thuggish things. For example, Mitch McConnell, the immoral guy that he is, ethically challenged guy that he is, to use politically correct English here, which I also don't support, he wants to cut medical Social Security benefits for senior citizens. Now, that's a thuggish thing to do. I can't relate to that ethical constitution. Why would you want to punish senior citizens for something they didn't do? Well, you'd have to ask Mitch McConnell. And he doesn't even hide it. Just like the Democrats last March, they announced their plan to raise your taxes after they were cut. Now, I admit that the tax cut that the Republicans, re-thuglicans, did largely benefited the rich. But let's be blunt about it. That was always their intention. So when I read in the New York Times this nonsense that the tax cuts were meant to help the average American people, but they didn't, so Trump is bad. I'm sorry, New York Times, you've blown it with both lips again. You're very good at that. What you did is you set up a phony strongman argument. You lied when you said that the tax cuts were designed to help the middle class. They were never designed to do that. If they were designed to help just the middle class, as most of the beneficiaries, then large casino owners such as Adelson wouldn't have received a $500 million windfall, would they? All these companies wouldn't have this extra millions and billions of dollars to buy back most of their stock, would they? No, they wouldn't have it because they didn't get that benefit. Instead, the money would have gone to the middle class, and it didn't. Instead, the tax cuts were exactly what the Republicans love to argue, which is delusional, and that's trickle-down economics. Give the rich what they want, and they'll take care of the poor. Doesn't work that way, folks. History has proven that. Even David Stockman, the bozo budget office director under Ronald Reagan's administration, admitted trickle-down economics doesn't work. He knew it wouldn't work, but he said what he said and lied the way he did because that was paying his bills at the time when he was in Reagan's administration. So you have on the left a party which says, we support the middle class. We support the best values of America. We support, and the way they define this is immigration for everybody. You can just show up to America illegally, we'll sort it out, okay? We want free education. We want free health care. We want everybody to make at least $15 an hour. We want taxes that benefit the middle class mostly. We want to reduce military spending. We want to encourage globalization and integration of the economies of different countries because if people are trading, they're not going to be bombing each other. We've heard this kind of stuff before. It sounds all lofty, utopian, but is it reality? No, it's not. In fact, there's some very draconian stuff going on here. I will tell you, as a longtime journalist who was a former Democrat and having seen the Democratic Party morph into something that bears no resemblance to what it used to be in the 60s when I first got interested in it, I miss the days when there were characters like Lyndon Johnson and John Kennedy that represented the Democratic Party, when they really did care about what most people were could relate to. They were against racism. They were against prejudices. They supported civil rights. But it wasn't out of control. We must remember that civil rights leaders back then, they bent over backwards to advocate nonviolence. Today, if you're a Trump supporter, the left is like, go kill him, go hurt him, go injure him, go harass him, go try to get him fired. Do anything to make his life miserable, make him an outcast, make him shunned in society. That is wrong, folks, on principle. In fact, it's pure hypocrisy. And I'd rather deal with somebody that I disagree with, at least he's being honest and upfront, than somebody who says, I've got your back, don't worry. And then the moment I turn my back, it gets a knife in it. That, to me, is what the Democrats do. Now, what about the Republicans? Well, they are not the party anymore of what they used to be. If Ronald Reagan were alive today trying to run for president, he would be shunned by the conservative crowd as a liberal, even though he's not. So I will tell you very briefly about my own education concerning Ronald Reagan, because I think I can use it as a valid example to raise issues that I think Reagan critics and people who hate the Republicans should really think about, because you have to distinguish between today's Republicans and what Reagan was doing at the time and what the Republican Party used to be. First of all, we have to remember basic history, which most people don't in America. I will tell you, as a fellow American, I can't tell you the number of Americans I've met who have told me, quote, I hate history, unquote. And I don't understand that. I can't relate to that mentality. I think you need to understand the past so that you can try to deal with the present and especially plan for the future. If you don't learn the lessons from the past, not only have you learned nothing, you're doomed or destined to repeat mistakes from the past. That's common sense. So in the case of Reagan, when I was a young man in high school and just entering the adult world, Reagan was the first president I could vote for, or I could vote for Jimmy Carter to reelect him. I was afraid that Ronald Reagan was going to take us to war because he talked about it. And we'll come back to that point after the commercial break here as we enter the fourth and final segment of the show, and then we'll wrap it up and I'll announce who our next guest will be. We'll be back after this commercial break.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Path Home Shamanic Art School has just launched a new online series of classes, Galactic Shamanism, Art of the Ancients, Key to Tomorrow. In these classes, composed and taught by Path Home founder and director Gwilda Wiyaka, you'll learn practical shamanic skills to support your daily life, such as how to build a medicine wheel to access the power of the earth, perform a shamanic journey, create sacred space in which to live and work, empower your life with totem animals, elementals, and fairy folk, and learn the art of accurately reading signs and omens. These tried and true skills are the key to living a powerful, productive life. Visit us at findyourpathhome.com to see the ever-growing collection of classes and leading-edge information to support you during these times of uncertainty and transition. All can be found at findyourpathhome.com.
They are here, and they've been here for thousands of years, making their presence known in the shadows. They might be seen by a lonely motorist on a deserted road late at night, or by a frightened and confused husband in the bedroom he is sharing with his wife. But who are they? What do they want? Why are they here? Perhaps most concerning, has the government been aware of their presence all along? The new book by Eli Marzulli, UFO Disclosure, The 70-Year Cover-Up Exposed, delves into the world of UFOs. Can full disclosure be soon? Order now and receive a free hour and 37-minute DVD on the UFO phenomenon. UFOs are real. Get both the book and the DVD, a $40 value, for only $19.99. To order your book and DVD today, go to lamarzulli.net. That's LAMARZULLI.net.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. Once again, my name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. So, to give you the short version of some interactions regarding the issue of Reagan being president in my short life, what happened is, of course, I grew up in a family that was pro-union. My dad was a hardcore Democrat, say a Kennedy Johnson type Democrat. Unions, as far as I was concerned, I understood why they existed. I think they're very valid things depending on the company. But I remember telling my dad and asking him this question. I said, Dad, why would you work for a company that is so bad that you need a union to protect you? And he couldn't answer that question. I said, well, Dad, I'd rather not work for that company, although I understand why the union exists. And I understand that it was necessary for some companies, especially decades ago. So as I grew up and worked for everything. When I worked at Lawrence Livermore Lab and Boeing and Apple and those big guys, they were not union at Boeing in the group that I was in, BCAG, which was Boeing Commercial Aircraft Group, in the IT department, as well as in the projects that I was matrixed to about half-time with Defense and Space. These were people with black stripes on their badges, of course, who had clearances and all that stuff. There were no unions. The unions tended to be in the assembly manufacturing area, and I was not in that. I was in systems computing architecture and IT department, of course, as an analyst and a bunch of other things on the standards boards. There were no unions. And I remember being at Apple, and union guys would approach us and say, hey, you want to unionize? And I remember one time I asked the union guy, well, what benefit will I get if I'm paying you X number of dollars a month? What are you going to do for me? And everything that he mentioned, we already had those benefits. In fact, we had better ones. So I said, why would I give you money to get something less or what I have now? He couldn't answer the question. So we voted against unionizing because Apple does take care of its people. That's a fact. So what you have in the political system is, as I was growing up, again, Democrat, I had a problem with Jimmy Carter because as I'm getting ready to enter the adult world, I'm seeing interest rates at double digit, like 21%. I'm seeing inflation out of control. I couldn't get a raise fast enough to keep up with inflation. And I remember Reagan said near the end of his third debate, he said, ask yourself this question when you go to vote. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? If you are, vote for him. If you're not, I'd like your vote. I think it's a very simple, straightforward, logical thing to say. But as someone who was entering the adult world and, of course, had to register for the draft and all that stuff, I was afraid that we were going to head into a war with Russia. And the reason I thought that is because in 1979, for 3 consecutive months, some very interesting things happened in the Middle East. One of these 3 events didn't receive a lot of coverage compared to the other. First of all, there was a takeover of Mecca by radical Islamic extremists. These were people who were similar to bin Laden. This guy thought he was the Mahdi, the return of the Messiah. And of course, they took the Mecca hostage. And what happened is French commandos had to be flown in to solve the Saudis' problem. They were officially converted to Islam, quote unquote, which was nonsense. They went in there and they poured water on the ground and with electrical cables electrocuted the terrorists as well as shot them. So the French cleaned up the Saudi mess. Then there was the Iranian Revolution in November of 1979. Ayatollah Khamenei came to power, and Iran has been screwed ever since. Then there was the invasion on Christmas Day, of course, deliberately, by the communist Soviet Union of Afghanistan. And of course, that invasion was wrong. So I'll never forget what happened. The Russians went on a PR tour worldwide to try to convince the world that what they were doing was just. So I was invited to go to San Francisco to the World Affairs Council, where the Russian delegation was going to give their lame excuses for why they invaded Afghanistan and ruthlessly brutalized it and murdered people there, especially innocent people and children. They'd actually equip toys with explosives, put them on the ground, knowing that children would pick them up and that they'd lose an arm or would die. What the Russians did deliberately is they wanted to maim or cripple 25% of the entire population, knowing that because of the tribal structures of the Afghan culture, that it would cause a disproportionate number of relatives to have to take care of that injured individual who, of course, had lost a limb or a leg or a hand or whatever. And that was one day of grinding down the Afghan people to subdue them. So what happened is these three events happened in a 3-month period. Jimmy Carter was absolutely a wimp on the world stage where it concerned foreign affairs. In fact, his apologists will say, well, look what he did in the Middle East. He forced peace between Israel and Egypt. Nonsense. The real story of that, folks, and I know it from Israelis, is that Mossad had finally convinced Anwar Sadat, Egypt's former dictator, was later assassinated because he signed that treaty with Israel for peace. He was assassinated by Zawahiri's group, which was later associated with Al-Qaeda, co-founded it with Osama bin Laden. Zawahiri's still alive today on the run, as far as we know. What happened was Mossad had finally convinced Sadat that there were a lot of people trying to kill him, and they kept telling him, this guy's trying to kill you, this guy's trying to kill you. Egypt would investigate it, find out it was true. Then they realized that Israel wasn't the enemy. These radical Islamic nuts were the enemy. So what happened is Sadat then took Israel seriously, sought peace. He and Begin got together, signed the agreement, and then, of course, he paid for it with his life. That's what happened. So my fear is that we're going to fight Russia. And I thought, if we go to war with Russia, it's going to be a nuclear war. There's no way it's going to be a contained conflict. So the idea that we need to draft people doesn't make sense, because you don't draft people when you're going to fire those kind of weapons. And if you fire those kind of weapons, it's the end of civilization. So this is really a tough nut to crack. And I didn't have faith in Reagan's rhetoric of, saying that he would go to war. In fact, he told Iran that if they didn't free the hostages by the time he was sworn in, he would start bombing. He wasn't bluffing, and I supported that action. What Carter did with the hostages and let Iran hold them the way they did was totally disgraceful. In fact, the Carter administration was so dysfunctional where it concerns Iran that there wasn't a single individual who spoke the Farsi language among the American delegations at the embassy. Can you imagine opening an embassy in a country as important as Iran back then, and nobody there speaks the native language? Are you that stupid? And these are supposedly experts and professionals, career bureaucrats, and they don't have anybody who can speak the local language? That was Jimmy Carter, okay? That's the kind of stupidity in the State Department that he ran. So I'm afraid we're going to get into war. So I go to the World Affairs Council, and of course I'm against communism. I'm against the USSR. I felt really bad that America turned over half of Europe to them to let them brutalize it after World War II, after defeating Hitler. And the Russians get up there and they give their whole story on why they invaded Afghanistan. And the short version was this. They showed a map that said that of all the population groups in the USSR, the Muslims were going to have explosive growth in population. And they basically said, if we don't take them out now, it'll be too late. So by the Russians' point of view, they were being proactive, even though it meant killing a lot of innocent people. That was their view. And they said this after I gave my little speech, lighting into them. I promise you I didn't mince any words. And I was very blunt, saying that this was wrong. And I still feel that way today, okay? But this was Russia's explanation. And then when I started working later at Lawrence Livermore Lab, was involved in projects that concerned the Strategic Defense Initiative, the so-called Star Wars program, I got to see how brilliant Reagan was foreign policy-wise, at least where it concerned Russia. And of course, he had given the famous speech, tear down the wall. Bush was taking over. It was going to be a continuation of those policies. And basically, Reagan ended the Cold War. And you have to give him credit for that. Even if you don't like him, you don't agree with Republicans, he ended the Cold War. He made a point to push the collapse of the Soviet Union by bankrupting them, by outspending them. And that's how he did it. And it worked. And the world has been a better place since, despite what Vladimir Putin says. So my respect for Reagan changed entirely. I understood the importance of the end of the Cold War. I was always worried about the Cold War. I always feared as a young kid that I might die in a nuclear holocaust, along with everybody else, of course, because that's what seemed to be inevitable at that time. And it still could happen one day. Let's be honest, folks. There's North Korea and some other bad guys out there. But you have to give Reagan his credit. And when you look today at his famous speeches of tear down this wall, well, why isn't Trump telling China to tear down its wall? I don't know. You'd have to ask Trump. Trump seems to like people who blow sunshine his way. Well, I'm not into blowing sunshine, so I can't relate to that mentality. So as far as I'm concerned, when you have a political party that wants to harm senior citizens, that doesn't care about the homeless, that just does things socially like cut education standards, they're not going to get my support. And I'm not going to support the other party who's in their opposition, who believes in no borders, who believes that everything should be free, that, we have over 100 different genders, and that it's wrong if people get upset or offended, and that millennials can't handle their smartphones because the smartphones are corrupting their minds. Let's ignore the issue of personal responsibility. There's a famous meme floating around. It shows Jesus, an image of him, saying, "Oh, you're a Democrat. I'll give you a pass on that abortion thing." That, to me, sums up the hypocrisy and the immorality of both parties. They've lost the higher ground. They claim they stand for it, but they really don't. So going forward, I'm going to start featuring people on the show who are average Americans, and I think you'll agree with their opinions. The first guest will be Roy Neal. He'll be on the next show. I'll tell you about Roy in the next episode. And for those people who think that those who don't support the Democrats are haters, extremists, racists, or whatever, all I can say is pull your head out of your you-know-what. We'll be back next week.
If you are looking for a safe, zero-calorie, natural option to the harmful artificial sweeteners on the market today, Just Like Sugar is what you're looking for. Just Like Sugar is a wonderful natural alternative for those health-conscious people who choose a calorie-restricted diet with a great, pure, sweet flavor that tastes just like sugar. Just Like Sugar is a great natural option for people suffering from diabetes and may be useful in restricted diet programs where standard sugars are not allowed and does not cause a laxative effect of some other sweeteners. Just Like Sugar comprises a perfect blend of chicory root fiber, natural calcium, natural vitamin C, and Just Like Sugar's sweetness comes from the natural flavors from the peel of the orange. Just Like Sugar is a natural alternative to harmful artificial sweeteners and will change the way that you believe all natural sweetener products taste. Just Like Sugar is available at your local Whole Foods markets, Wild Oats markets, Henry's, Sun Harvest, and many other fine natural food stores in the U.S., Canada, and worldwide.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.